Okay, so this will give you a plus in your resume as a Python developer in just 1 week of coding. I've just started developing an application in Python that utilizes artificial intelligence. What I want is to create an application where you can provide the artificial intelligence with any of your personal documents and then ask the AI questions about them. My plan is, in this case, is to integrate it with my Google Calendar. So I can, for example, ask, what do I have in my agenda for this week, divided by tasks, for example, and etc. Okay, so after a quick research, I stumbled upon Langchain. It's a Python library that, in short, allows you to create your own chatbot using the API of any large language model. I chose the OpenAI free API because it's currently the most popular one. Okay, so here we are. As a beginner, I started by following the quick tutorial provided in Langchain's documentation. I did it using a Jupyter notebook, which is a tool for executing Python scripts line by line, giving you more control in debugging. This is extremely useful when working with artificial intelligence, of course. Let me demonstrate for you the basic tools that Langchain offers. First, we have to import the OpenAI API. I have mine set in the environment variables. This API offers a $5 free trial, which for hobby developers is more than enough if you ask me. Quick note, you will need to use a personal email account to get the API. I tried it with my university email and didn't work. That's a matter of permissions for sure. Okay, so now I'll demonstrate with an easy to follow question answer example how this works. Okay, since today is March 7, 2024, and we know that ChatGPT is not up to date with the most recent data, I'm going to ask it, okay, like here, where was born the current president of Colombia, my country? And it replies this. I do not have information of the current president of Colombia as my training data only goes up until September 2021. Okay, so now what we need to do is start customizing the prompt so that ChatGPT may find it easier. I will tell it that, for example, it's a world-class news anchor. Right here in system, I'm just providing more context and just like saying you're going to reply to me as if you were a world-class news anchor. Okay. And now it replies. I'm sorry, I don't have a real-time information. Would you like me to look up the current president of Colombia for you? Which is something of a better. After adding some simple string parser, now it replies like the current president of Colombia is Iván Duque Márquez. He was born on August 1st, 1976 in Bogota, Colombia. Which was correct. I mean, 2 or 3 years ago, but not anymore. So from now on, I'll just increase the amount of context. And for that, I'll make it search this Wikipedia page about the presidency of Colombia. Right here. It's just the article about the president of Colombia. It's important to notice that when we add an external file to the context, there is a pretty standard flow of information that we have to comply with. Here we can see in this diagram of our retrieval chain, we can see that in order to properly answer the original question, we need to provide additional context to the LLM. We can do this via retrieval. Retrieval is useful when you have too much data to pass to the large language model directly. You can then use a retriever to fetch only the most relevant pieces and pass those in. One of the most common ways to store and search over unstructured data is to embed it and store the resulting embedding vectors. At query time, we embed the unstructured query and retrieve the embedding vectors that are most similar to the embedded query. A vector store takes care of storing embedded data and performing vector search for it. Don't worry, in Python we can do all of that in just like 3 lines of code, really. It's just here. These 3 lines of code do all the magic for us. And now, like that, it gives us the reply. The context does not provide any information about where the current president of Colombia was born, which is fair. I mean, that page doesn't specify where the president was born to begin with. By the way, if you don't need to query the internet, you just pass your own context, like for example here. I'm providing it with a context that I just made up. I'm saying that the president of Colombia is someone called, I don't know, Rodolfo Fernandez, born in New York, which is fake. But given this context, it's going to reply accordingly. The current president of Colombia was born in New York, if you don't need to search for internet information. Conversation retrieval chain. Okay, the chain we've created so far can only answer single questions. One of the main types of large language model applications that people are building right now are chatbots. So how do we turn this chain into one that can answer a follow-up questions? We can still use the create retrieval chain function, but we need to change two things, okay? The retrieval method should now not just work on the most recent input, but rather should take the whole history into account. The final large language model, therefore, should likewise take the whole history into account. In order to update the retrieval, we will create a new chain. This chain will take in the most recent input and the conversation history, the chat history, and use the large language model to generate a search query. Okay, what does that mean? So basically, what we do is add a new placeholder in the prompt template, like this, chat history. And every time we make a question to the model, we update the chat history so it includes all the questions the user has made and all the replies the model has come out with. With a prompt like that, each time that we make a new query, the query contains beneath all the precedent conversation. We send that to the API and voila, we give the illusion to the user of a continuity. Next, what I did was some kind of reverse engineering. I tell the model, okay, given the above conversation, generate a search query to look up in order to get information relevant to the conversation. That just demonstrates that it has appended the previous queries into one chat history. And after all of that, we can finally see the correct answer. The answer, the president of Colombia, Gustavo Petro, was born in Ciénaga de Oro, Córdoba, Colombia. Which is correct. Important note. What just happened? Well, in a nutshell, I don't know. It's more related to how ChatGPT itself works. It works better according to the quality of context you provide to it. Before, we were just asking it short questions and it replied simply like, well dude, I don't know. But now we provide the whole chat history, including the internet pages information. Now it has enough material to make the connection. Okay, according to this website, the president is someone called Petro. I don't know the age or the birthplace of the president Petro, but I do know the birthplace of a person called the same because when I was trained, the model, that person was included in my dataset, so I can tell you his birthplace. Okay, and we've so far created examples of chains, where each step is known ahead of time. The final thing we will create is an agent, where the large language model decides what steps to take. Note, for this example right here below, we will only show how to create an agent using the OpenAI models, as local models are not reliable enough yet. One of the first things to do when building an agent is to decide what tools it should have access to. For this example, we will give the agent access to two tools. The retrieval that we just created, this will let it easily answer questions about the presidency, and a search tool. This will let it easily answer questions that require up-to-date information. The search tool that we will use is Stably. This will require an API key. They have a very generous free tier, so we add the new API just here alongside the previous one. So what we do here is basically just adding a second API service, in this case a search API, so we do not have to provide the exact website, but rather let this API make the internet query itself, like some kind of data scraping. So given the question, it retrieves automatically from the internet all the necessary information. And so finally we get the answer. Gustavo Petro, the current president of Colombia, was born in Ciénaga de Oro, Córdoba, Colombia. Having understood this process, I can finally proceed with my own implementation of all of this. Now I will show you how to use the Google Calendar API for customizing the fetching of events in your calendar. So fundamentally, you have to do three things in order to use this API, so let me show you. First, you have to enable the Google Calendar API. Second, you will configure the OAuth consent window, which is the window users encounter when granting access to their Google accounts. And third, authorize the API credentials in your application. Okay, so that process looks more or less something like this. So first we go to this page. This is the console.cloud.google. It's an interface for your Google account. This is mine, for example. And if you don't have a project yet, you have to create it. I have my project here, else we have to create a new one right here in new project. Once the project is created, select it from the drop-down menu, just like this. I can select the project that I already have. Now you have to enable the API that you want to use for your project. For this, it's important to know that all Google APIs have a long documentation explaining how to use them. Let me show you. Okay, if you remember well, first you have to enable the API. It's very simple with that simple button that you will find right here. I already did. Now, all Google APIs have a long documentation explaining how to use them. I personally prefer the quick starts because I prefer to jump into action as soon as possible. So here you can find that in this quick start. In the quick start, you select the programming language that you are using. In my case is Python. So I just go here and I select Python and I have the quick start for this language. So now we have already enabled the API. The second step is to configure the OAuth window. So for that we go here. Mine is already configured, but if it is your first time, it's very simple. You just select, for example, external use, because in an internal use is if you have a domain, like if you have a company domain, and you have to set up a name for the application. In my case is VGCC test. You give the email of the responsible person behind the data that these will collect. In my case, I'm just using my personal email. In this case, I'm just using my personal email. And you let all the domain part in blank, because if you are doing this like a hobby project, it's not part of your organization, I hope. And at the end you simply save and continue, and then you have all the metrics of use of that API. In permissions, you just add the permissions of calendar. So you go here and you can see that you can search for the permissions you want. All I want is simply the permissions for the Google Calendar API. And in test users, you add the people that will test the application. In my case, I just add two of my emails for testing. And for last, we're going to create the credentials. We go in here and we specify that we're going to create a credential of the type OAuth client ID for a desktop application. And after that, we simply have to download the JSON file. We have to change the name of the file to credentials.json and place it in our project. But remember to add it into your .gitignore alongside the token.json file. That is a file that is created at runtime after a user logs in the application, and it contains their access tokens. You don't want those secrets to be leaked, trust me. And last but not least, we have to install this library in our development environment. Okay, so I just copy-paste the quick start code, and up to now I've made some minor modifications. First, we have to import the libraries. The scopes is a variable that defines the access scope for the Google Calendar API. In this case, it's set to read-only access. So, it begins by checking if there are stored credentials in a file named token.json. If the file exists, it loads the credentials from it. If there are no stored credentials, or if the stored credentials are invalid, it initiates the OAuth flow to obtain new credentials, as you can see here. After obtaining valid credentials, it finally initializes the Calendar API service using these credentials. Then it defines the start and end dates for the time range for which events will be retrieved from the calendar. In this case, I want to fetch all the events from 1 year ago up to the present day. Finally, it calls the Calendar API to retrieve events between the specified dates and prints out the start time and summary of each event. Okay, so now I'm going to run this code. First, in my Jupyter Notebook, I run the library, and then I run this. Okay, so I just run the code, and I had previously deleted the token.json file that I was talking about previously. So it is now asking me to give my consent for using my data for this Google account. So I will use this account, and I will continue. It says that Google hasn't verified this application, but I mean, it's my own application, so there is no problem there. I accept the conditions that I myself just set up, and here it says the authentication flow has completed. You may close this window. We can see that it works. Actually, it worked so good that some of these events were not actually inside the calendar of the Google account I used for the example, but in my other Google Calendar, the one that I used for my exchange in Montreal. How did Google get access to those events is beyond my understanding, which is a little creepy. But anyway, now all we have to do left is feeding the large language model we just created with the events that we just fetched.
One eternity later.
And be welcome to the final part of this tutorial. We've crafted the frontend using Angular 17, and I just built the backend with Fast API. Our internationalization protocol is called in Angular I18N, and that allows us to deploy the application in different languages. But in this case, I'm just running the application in its original language, and that is English. Okay, first let's dive into the About page, where you'll discover the usage instructions, the ways to reach out to me, and the links to the project repos for forking. I mean, if you want to fork these repositories, either the backend or the frontend, you are welcome to do so. Show me your own versions, that will be really cool. My LinkedIn profile is here, how to use, and examples of use. For example, if you use this application, you can include your personal and work calendar emails and then ask, what do I have planned for the next week? Or are there any scheduled conflicts between all my different calendars? Another option would be incorporate calendars of friends and seek advice on the ideal day and time for social gatherings or vacations. Okay, so that's very cool. Now, here's where it gets interesting. I'm going to ask here, at this point I haven't added any context at all. I haven't retrieved any calendars. So if I ask, let me just set the keyboard to English, and what do I have in my agenda for next week? And ChatGPT just answered, and ChatGPT answered something that it's not correct. So I'm just going to select a date range. For example, I'm going to choose from January 1st until the end of April. I'm going to add a new calendar. Here I'm going to add first my personal calendar, my personal account. I just have to consent to Google, continue. This authentication flow has completed. You may close this window. Perfect. Now, but here you can see that I now have a user. That's my first user. I'm going to add a second calendar with the same date range. This time I'm going to add my professional account. Continue. And I may close this window. Now I have two users, each of them with their own expiry date, because these session tokens are personal information that I cannot store forever, so they last only like 8 hours or less. And so I'm going to repeat the same question. What do I have in my agenda for the next week? Okay, that's a more precise information. I can also ask, when did I go in vacations to Orlando? and I went on vacation to Orlando on January 24th, which is correct. And that was in my personal, that was an event that was stored in my personal account. I can also say how many events in my calendar are named W, and it's going to retrieve all the events in my calendar that are called like that. I can ask him, count them please, and there are a total of 32 events. Okay, that's really cool. And when I press this button, reset all, I have to agree to this confirmation notification, yes, and that's going to delete the history of the chat, the users, all the session tokens, and all of the context provided. All of the events that had been retrieved are now deleted for security reasons. And that's a wrap for today. Don't forget to show me some love if you have liked this video. So like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to stay tuned for the upcoming videos. And thank you for tuning in. Thank you for watching. Until the next time.